I'm absolutely delighted to talk to you, Amitava. Thank you so much, Town Hall Seattle. Thank you so much, Team of Cards. Thank you to all of you for being here. What a pleasure it is to talk to you about your novel. Devika has already eloquently given a synopsis, so we're not going to go into that. My Beloved Life. And what an honor it is to be doing so for the second time because I interviewed you for my podcast. In addition to the nitty-gritty and the here and now of the narrative itself, I'm intrigued by the title of your work all over again, My Beloved Life, which makes me reflect on whose life we are actually talking about. As Triti Omrigar wonders whether the title should be more clunkier than My Beloved Life and whether the novel should be entitled My Beloved Life and the life of every other character in the novel. To borrow from her again, the novel has a 1001 Nights feel to it. Within the overarching frame of the father and daughter's lives, the novel is dense with characters and themes, a story that is sweeping in its history, scope, and breadth. The book moves at an incredible pace, with many anecdotes regarding the interior lives of other characters, regardless of their place within the larger story. Each narrative arc of small and big characters, fully etched out even in its glimpse, leaving us a little agonized, hurt, joyful, filled with anticipation, and pining for more. The stories narrate the lives of ordinary people in the pre- and post-independence India. So the question is, how important was this in fleshing out the entire narrative that adds to the overall theme of individual life being utterly consequential?
First of all, Alka has been very busy organizing this festival, so I feel a little embarrassed that she has to even pay attention to my little novel. You know what I'm saying? And the very fact that I see so many post-it notes introduces fear into my heart. What is she going to ask? But the first question I think I can deal with, yes. Is the opening act. It's like an opener's anxiety in cricket, is the ball swinging? And there is a little swing. My title comes from two lines from Louise Glick's poem. It goes, "Death cannot harm me more than you have harmed me, my beloved life." I like that it is, that the harm has come from life, but the life is still beloved. And I think there's a sense of delicious and painful irony that I kind of appreciate. As to the question of how to pay attention to all kinds of lives, I'm really opposed to that kind of literature that confers heroism and glory to one or two characters. And you find this in the rash of Indian writing that is devoted to mythologies. That's what's happening, It's a narrative of triumph. I'm interested in failure, or in ordinary strivings and ordinary defeats, which is, I think, the human lot for most people. I think that is a more democratic act. Does that make sense? A friend of mine who is a very popular Hindi anchor in India, Ravish, he was reading a book by the head of the Indian Election Commission. And Ravish's point to me was that this man could have written about meeting other foreign dignitaries, ministers, important officers, but what he really wrote about was his father's life and small incidents. The writer's father was a small-time bureaucrat. The writer's sister is in hospital with pneumonia. The writer, as a 9-year-old boy, has to be taken by the father to a hospital, has been taken to a boarding house. When he arrives at the railway platform for this journey to the boarding house, the father is in a conundrum. Shouldn't he go back to the daughter whose life is in danger in the hospital, or should he take the son? And then he hands over the son to a stranger and says, "Could you please take him to the boarding house if you are going to the same town?" And he did. The stranger did. And Ravish's point was, this ordinary life and this belief that we had in the ordinary humanity of our other fellow people in the country is a wonderful thing to honor, and I thought I would be doing that. One last thing. I've asked Manojji to show these things on, because I want to link somewhere and explain, because Alka said to say something about novel writing, that I would like us to gather just this idea that novel writing or any other serious writing has a close relationship to journal writing. And I'll make this point clearer later on, whenever Alka decides to question me on that.
Thank you. The novel offers a meditation on illness and death. You offer deeply moving accounts of sickness, close shaves with death, death itself, inconsequential deaths, and those that forever change the lives of people. Would you like to read a little passage from your novel to reflect on this?
Yeah. You know, when 9/11 happened in this country, I kind of liked a statement made by Frederick Jameson. Various writers were asked to comment on it, and he said, this was a year later or 2 years later, I can't remember, he said, 9/11 hasn't stopped happening. In that same way, COVID hasn't stopped happening, not because one of us or two of us might fall sick tomorrow or day after. No, I mean the consequences are still to be understood. What happened in India, how in various parts of the world, because of the amount of people dying, how maybe strong men were elected into office later on, etc., etc. Or this is my feeling. I'm just setting that up. So I'm still thinking about COVID in a more serious way. I'll read out a section where the daughter has come from India to Emory in Atlanta, Emory University, to study journalism, and then she stays there working for CNN, and then an editor in Patna in Bihar in India asks her to write an obituary when her father dies. So I'll just read maybe 2-3 minutes, is that okay? What is this grief that seems to be mine alone, attached to my feelings for a particular person, my father, and yet seems to cover like a giant cloud the whole universe right now? We are in the middle of a pandemic. My father used to so often repeat the story of the grieving woman who came to the Buddha. Her son had died, and she wanted the Buddha to give her some medicine that would bring the child back to life. The Buddha asked the woman to bring him some mustard seeds from a house where there had been no death. The woman knocked on the door of one house after another, and after hearing in each house a sorrowful account of loss, she realized that grief had been a visitor to every home. I always thought that this parable wasn't so much about the presence of sorrow as it was about Buddha's style of teaching. How to invent an active learning exercise. My father was a teacher, and this story appealed to him. I don't think he would have known really what to do with me now, what to do with this extreme feeling of loss that has made me a cripple. To understand my grief and to soothe me, he would have to convert his absence into presence, not as a teacher, but once again as a loving parent. In these days after his death, as I walk around my apartment by myself, my eyes swollen, my body hurting, feeling lost, there is another story from the Mahabharata that sometimes comes to me. The blind king, Dhritarashtra, has retreated from his throne. He is living in the forest with his wife, Gandhari. Gandhari makes for a memorable character in that epic because, apart from bearing 100 sons and a daughter for Dhritarashtra, she has also taken a vow of blindness. She has tied a blindfold over her eyes. To do what exactly? To assure her husband that he is not alone, or to forge a bond with him, or to present a perverted model of matrimony. It doesn't matter. Dhritarashtra and Gandhari are in the forest with Kunti, the mother of the heroic Pandavas. Everyone is getting a lesson here in mythology. I think this is popular in India right now. You guys should also be happy about what I'm doing. So I'm sorry I'm extending the 2 minute to about 4. Fade away. Okay. The Pandavas are the cousins of the Kauravas, and the Mahabharata is an epic description of the battle between the two clans. The Pandavas win with some Kissinger-level duplicity on the part of their charioteer and advisor, Lord Krishna. And in the forest with Dhritarashtra and company is also the old and eminent Vidura, the embodiment of wisdom and truth, who happens to be uncle to both Kauravas and the Pandavas. In the story, as I remember it, Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava, comes to visit the elders who have exiled themselves in the forest. Upon not seeing Vidura, Yudhishthira inquires after him. Dhritarashtra replies that Vidura has been practicing a terrible penance, neither eating nor drinking, simply wandering in the forest. Then Yudhishthira is told that Vidura has been seen, naked, covered with dust, nothing but skin and bones. Yudhishthira begins his search and finally catches sight of Vidura. He runs after him. Vidura, stop. I'm your dear Yudhishthira. They both keep running deep into the forest until Vidura stops and leans his back against a tree. I am Yudhishthira. Vidura fixes his unblinking eye on Yudhishthira, and using his yogic power, he enters Yudhishthira's body limb by limb. Vidura gives Yudhishthira everything, his life, his organs, his wide erudition, his brilliance. It is this behavior that makes many readers of the Mahabharata suspect that Vidura was, in fact, Yudhishthira's father. Or perhaps they are led to this conclusion because there is a description in the Upanishads of what a man nearing death is to do. He should lie on the bare ground and make his son lie on top of him, saying, "Son, I give you my organs." The son should reply, "I accept." This terrible pandemic prevented me from being with my father when he was dying. I would have liked to cover him with my body. And when he said, "Daughter, I give you my organs," I would have very much liked to reply, "I accept." There is the pain I feel in my entire body about not having been given the chance to conduct this ritual of transfer, to be able to assure my father that though I myself was no longer young, he would continue to live on through me. At the same time, I am aware that all the story of Vidura's death in the Mahabharata does is dramatize a process that very often has gone on over a lifetime of toil and sacrifices for my sake. All his life, my father imparted to me his learning, his love, and the fruits of his labor. I accept, I accept, I accept. Sorry, I went on a bit too long.
Thank you for reading that. It is so deeply moving. And it's a segue into my next question, or my next comment. Reflecting on Jadu's death, in addition to all that you very eloquently narrate, Jugnu worries about losing forever her connection to India, not just her father, the connection with his memories and her identity. It also prompts her to reflect more about her relationship with her father and the nature of their connection, whether or not they were friends in the classic understanding of the term. And also, reflecting on Motley's death, Motley, who's her Black American lover and friend, Jugnu reflects on the state of violence against Black Americans. So talk to us about how we reconstruct things after the fact, especially in the context of someone's death.
Well, first of all, I feel that for me, and I'm sure it might be true for other people here who have my origins, in the sense that we were born in India and have come here, I feel that connection is dying. So I'll speak about that death first for a minute. I practice journalism as a way of trying to recover a sense of connection just by entering people's lives in India and reporting on it. Just last month, for example, I was writing a piece which will come out in the New Yorker, where I took a journey on a train called Him Sagar Express. Him is Himachal, like a Himalaya, and Sagar is the sea, so it goes from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. And just to make that journey and ask people, what is happening? What has happened over the last few years in Modi's India? How do you construct your sense of yourself and other? Have we progressed? What has changed? It's just a way of learning. So for me, first of all, that's just journalism is a way of reconnecting. The idea of reporting on something that is happening, like as with Motley's death, is the idea of just being alert to the everyday. Remember, novel and news both have the same root word. What is new? You know, when you're writing a novel, if you're not doing the thing that I mocked a moment ago when people are writing these mythologies about superheroes in prehistoric India, with magical bows, bows and all kinds of chakra, Sudarshan chakra, mitron. What I'm trying to do is reporting just on what it means to be alive today. So I wrote a little bit about Motley, etc., because at the moment that the book was being written, we were very much living through the moment of Black Lives Matter also. And I didn't want the life of an Indian living in America to be utterly cut off from what was gripping America at that time. So that live sense is what I wanted to communicate, and I hope it did.
You chart a fascinating development of Jadu's arc of identity. To just give one example, Jadu's meeting with Tenzing Norgay is pivotal. He holds Norgay in high regard, no doubt, but this meeting also allows this encounter to make a break from his past. All the more so because it catapults him into a new world, a new way of looking at the world, which is so different from how he was raised by a mother who's interested in religion more than in intellectual, or religious rather than intellectual pursuits. He says, God has his place, but man was important too. How is Jadu's search for knowledge an almost identity-based quest?
Yeah, I mean, if you were growing up in newly independent India, and if your parents had told you that their ideal was Shravan Kumar, who carried his parents to all the pilgrimage sites of India, which incidentally was not only true of my father, I was also myself told the same thing when I was a young boy, that you must take your parents or to grandparents to the important pilgrimage sites. But if you're growing up in independent India, this idea of belonging to the nation, to a newly independent nation, its aspirations, was an important lesson. But at the same time, what would it mean, I was thinking, for a young man at that time to meet someone like Norgay, the first man to have climbed Everest with Edmund Hillary, and to be told that when they went up, they planted the flags of India, Nepal, New Zealand, and the United Nations. You know, it was an entry into a modern identity that was, if not global, at least had a sense of an identity that extended beyond the national borders. So I just wanted to mark that. Because even in my case, when I was growing up in Patna in eastern India, Edmund Hillary came for a journey. So this is many years after he has, quote unquote, conquered Everest. He came on a journey where he was going on a boat with other people right up from where the Ganga empties into the sea up to where it starts in Gangotri. The mission had to be aborted later on, but it was important for me to meet this person, and to have this sense of our belonging to a broader, for the lack of a better word, fraternity. So that's what I was trying to do there.
Central to the narrative arc of the novel is a meditation on survival. There's a scene in which Jadu is considering selling his land to pay for his daughter's wedding. He feels a great generational attachment to this land and reflects on the meaning of the land in the context of his family's history. In so many ways, it reminds me of Mr. Biswas's pursuit of a house. Both Jadu and Mr. Biswas represent land, property and ownership, or regard land, property, and ownership as symbols of identity, autonomy, and personal fulfillment. Jadu, for him, his land is tied to his sense of identity, belonging, his connection with family. It also offers a broader critique of class, power, and survival in a particular historical context. So in that context, talk about Naipaul's influence on your writing.
Yeah. You know, James Wood in his review mentioned Naipaul, and many people I met at literary festivals would say, yeah, what is this? Why was Naipaul mentioned? But I could not tell them that actually that book has meant a lot to me. And in order to, in a stupid way, claim some originality, I did not immediately say to them, actually, I was trying to do something which mimics what's happening in that novel. So Alka, just for you, I'll be honest this time. What happened is, when you read that novel, Biswas, you know, Naipaul's Biswas, the father wants to be a writer. He's a journalist in Trinidad. He comes from a family background where there is no example that he can have for doing this kind of work. And the father always wants to publish a book. It doesn't happen. And for those who are aware of, you know, what has happened since Naipaul won the Nobel Prize, is that in India, his father's book, as well as a book of essays about Naipaul, was published together, etc., etc. In any case, I was interested in the father's failure to publish a book, and the son's ambition to follow what the father had tried to instruct him in, and to achieve the success that the father never had. Cool? My father died last year, so he will not hear this. But my father, after I started publishing books, would want to publish a book. And once he self-published a book, and he had the publisher come to my book launch on that same day. So it was kind of moving. But also I thought, not entirely cool. I mean, like chill, you know. But I understood the ambition, the desire to put into words what he felt was his memoir or his biography. You know what I'm saying? So that's what Jadu wants to write because he was born in the same town as Orwell in Bihar, wants to write his own homage to Catalonia, doesn't quite succeed. But maybe his daughter has a better chance of doing something. You know what I'm saying? So that's what was the influence. For me, it was there right in the genetic code. I hope I'm not a science guy, so I know next panel is on science, so someone can correct me. But it was right there in my genetic code in the writing of the thing.
But you're not really telling us the truth, because Naipaul, you talk about his rules of writing and all that, but we're not going to talk about that now. But I just feel that you didn't give us an insight into that.
Oh, sure, but it's a little story. I was a columnist for Tehelka around 2000s, and I went to the office, and there was a rule of a thing on the wall saying rules of writing. And then it was revealed to me that one of the reporters, when Naipaul visited, had asked, "Sir, what are your rules of writing?" And he had written some, and then he had corrected it, he had fussed over it, and he was a wonderful writer in that way. There were rules like, avoid the abstract, go for the concrete. If you use a word whose meaning is not clear to you, you should leave writing as a profession. I loved those things. So it also said, as a beginner, you should write sentences that are no longer than 8 to 10 words. And I had already published a book or two, but I thought, let me just follow his beginner's rule. And I wrote a book called Bombay, London, New York, which I just followed his rules. Not writing long sentences, not using long words, and, so I owe a lot to, his influence and exercise. Yeah, thanks for reminding us of that.
And so
you're making me confess all kinds of things.
Well, I'm just telling you, here you are, after following those rules. I was struck by the scene in America with Professor Trivedi. While referring to the massacre of a Dalit community, he asked Jadu, how do we get Indian Americans to think about India as well as America? The whole Dalit Basti was torched. You were talking a minute ago of Indians looking at watches and jewelry in the glass cases at foreign airports. You were talking about air conditioning and cars. These realities are far away from the lives of the Dalit peasant in Bihar. Many of us don't pay heed to those realities. I want to ask you how you're going to change the thinking of our people, not about America, but about India. So this meditation in your novel is particularly poignant given the increasing bigotry and violence in India. Talk about that.
Okay, good question. But listen, in that scenario, the daughter says that her father, when he's asked this question after he has made that speech at the Rotary Club of Patna, just says this like this, and he does not answer the question. And then he takes her to the Khadi Gramodyog board and says, Professor Trivedi's kurta was very nice, let's buy a kurta. What I'm saying is, he refused to answer the question because he thought Professor Trivedi was performing in some ways. And we are performing too. But what I'm just saying is, he doesn't think that the raising of moral stakes in a forum like this is necessarily always an exercise in good faith. That's the first thing. But the second thing I want to do is nevertheless answer the question as clearly as I can. I'm teaching a nature writing course this semester. It's the first time I'm teaching such a course. Thinking about what does it mean to write about the Anthropocene. I'm not an expert, I don't know much, but I told my students on the first day that we don't need to be experts now. Climate change is affecting our lives in such a serious way that all of us need to respond to it. And so one of the ways I think Indian Americans, or Americans for that matter, and Indian lives can be articulated together is precisely by addressing issues of climate change. To say that the waters that will rise and drown Calcutta will not leave Miami untouched. So that is one of the ways in which I want to address that. I mean, when I was a grad student, I remember I was just writing my dissertation when the Babri Masjid was, the mosque was, 16th century mosque was demolished in Ayodhya. And I was aware at that time that donations and gold bricks from this country had gone to build the temple on that disputed site. And now that has been accomplished. And I've always felt that in some ways we should try to, to answer your question, address that issue and perhaps open the minds or hearts of people here, is to say that the narrow emotion, or rather the soft emotion of nostalgia can't be allowed to be turned into the hard emotion of fundamentalism. So that's one way in which I'd like to address that.
We have very little time for the last question, but that was one of the questions that you initially wanted us to discuss. So talk to us about the relationship between drawing, journaling, and writing.
Yeah, just very quickly, 1 minute. I say to my students that you have to keep a journal. You have to write 150 words every day. And you should walk mindfully for 10 minutes. To walk mindfully means to imagine that you're planting lotuses with your feet when you're walking. You're rushing to the parking lot, but you imagine you're planting lotuses with your feet. You can do that? In fact, between the sessions, you should walk around and plant some lotuses with your feet. I really think that if you write down what's happening, you not only give order to the chaos of life, you also create a record. So, for example, in this nature writing course, I'm asking them to keep a journal about the weather every day, and what is the story that they find about global warming. They have to write it down. Small story, just a record. So it becomes a record of our lives. And that makes us more alert.
So we have time for some questions. I can't see anything. Are we passing mics around?
There's a hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Kumar. I am actually reading, full disclosure, I'm still reading your book. And I'm at 50%. I'm with Jugnu right now. So everybody keeps talking about this, and I'm reading it, I'm listening to it on Libby, and it's so nice to hear your voice, especially how you pronounce emergency. It's not emergency, but it's an emergency. And I just went back and reheard that. So I don't know why people, I'm an economist. I keep thinking about variables, and they keep talking about this book is an arc of Jadu's life. An arc is a continuous variable. This is a scatter plot. There's nothing linear about, descriptions of death, life, people that become ministers. And so it's a scatter plot, and as an economist, I try to minimize the residual between actual observation and fitted observations. So one variable that is bothering me about this, and I haven't read the book, so you may have addressed it later on, is Jadu and his daughter on the train, and she's being harassed. And that's an outlier for me because Jadu tries and Jadu does not. Is that, I get this bit about moralizing, but if it were my dad, he would have bashed the skull of that guy in. He would have. I would just, he was an Air Force officer, so he would do that. But I just felt like I just want to love Jadu, and I don't want to love him too, but that's an outlier for me. Could you explain why he didn't defend his daughter being eve-teased on that train?
Thank you. The arc is a little bit about things happening in life, but there's also an arc of storytelling. So what happens once in one person's telling is something that you return to later in the novel in the other person's telling. So there are all kinds of arcs, in other words, I'm trying to say. When people talk about plot, they think about something happening, and then let's say someone's murder, and then you're discovering who murdered, and then you're happy that the story is over because now all your curiosity has been appeased. But I'm of the school which believes that, as Laurie Moore put it, plot is for dead people, because she imagines plot is for graves, that she's punning on that. Because life, as you live day to day, doesn't follow a very strict arc. All kinds of things happen. We only impose a vision on it or give it an order. So what I am really doing there is thinking about presenting life often in its unresolved confusion. Someone he tries to address these gentlemen, who are making comments. He sees his daughter is frustrated. He's acting according to his own calculations, and he explains it. And in another part of the story, we'll return to another accounting from that other character's position of what is happening, etc. So that's I don't think novels should satisfy your idea of what a character should do and whether they are lovable. I think they should stay true to who they are, and you judge them. You don't have to like them, you judge them, and you move on. That's the way what you should do with your neighbors also.
More questions I can't see. Yes, yep.
Dr. Kumar.
Yeah, doctor chodo. That's for real people who are doctors.
So, I don't know if you recall this, but 25 years ago maybe, we had met in Defense Colony, and we had a conversation. I was a young and rather foolish journalist at the time. And we had a discussion about diaspora, and you have been writing a lot about the diaspora. And at that time, I had said to you that as someone who was an army brat living in Delhi, I felt that I was part of a diaspora. I had no roots anywhere, and there was this longing to identify with some part of my world. And after moving to the US, close to 9 years ago now, I realized that that desire for rootedness, which is in some ways, you know, it's also this running theme across your novels, whether it's passport photos or Bombay, London, New York, or there is this kind of desire for rootedness, which in our lives finds expression in so many different ways. So for the people who moved here, say, 30 years ago, they are still sort of stuck in this like hum aapke hain kaun kind of time warp, right? It's like everything's like about these sort of fun synthetic saris and wedding sangeets and people who haven't visited South Asia in decades. And in their imagination, it is this beautiful, idyllic kind of world which is placed on a pedestal. And for some of us who travel every year to India, connect with what is happening, it is a very, very different India. I've spoken to friends who came here when they were 3. How then, as a literator, as a writer, do you reconcile the very different diasporic visions of what we still call home?
Yeah, sure. I basically want to celebrate those writers, younger writers, much younger writers than me, you know, so I'm saying people half my age who are writing books that show the sort of India, the contemporary India that the questioner was asking about. And I think the JLF is doing a good job of bringing such writers over too. You know, for example, there is a book called Dreamers by Snigdha Poonam about young people doing all kinds of things, all kinds of jobs, including the important job of scamming, which is an important source of employment for the unemployed youth in India. I have found that very illuminating. The same goes for Mansi Choksi's book on the newlyweds, on people marrying across caste lines. So the real response is that there are these wonderful books being written by folks who are experiencing, quote unquote, the real India, not the India that is canned 30 years ago or 50 years ago, though that too is important. I love watching Wahida Rahman and Devanand, in these old videos late at night on YouTube. It's a great joy. So I participate in that myself too, but I'm very much open to learning about new things.
I was talking about my latest obsession with Facebook Reels, endless with Wahida Rahman and Devanand.
All good?
Any more questions?
Complaints? The first questioner's comment reminded me that my wife, who's also happens to be an economist, always says, when will you learn to say development? And she pronounces it in the right way. I have peasant origins in Bihar. I can't say development in the ways that Americans pronounce it, Or she says president, it's not president. Good.
So if the number, we have, please. I think going to the mic probably inhibits people from asking questions.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me? Hi, I'm going to pile on to the earlier question a little bit.
Pile on. This is now in Indian context.
Yeah.
थोड़ा सा adjust कर लो boss.
सच में शुरू करूँ क्या? अच्छा नहीं. So, there is a hidden socioeconomic underpinning to that question, which is basically some set of people who came 30 years ago could afford to go back every year, and some set of people who came 30 years ago didn't, and couldn't, and possibly still don't, right? I loved what he said about this whole nostalgia not becoming, fundamentalism. Would you care to address the sort of aspect of how that addresses the, if you like, immigrant experience, in that if you, the luxury of not needing to assimilate fully, if just as there's probably many aspects and you can probably come up with more, but that's one that just struck me, that when you come to even as, you're an army brat moving from city to city, you have to assimilate or not. Or you can decide that I'm an army brat, my culture is army friends or whatever. Or you can say, nope, I'm in Patna or Delhi or Bombay or Madras or whatever. Now I have to sort of realign my worldview to this. There is, I think, some aspect of the immigrant experience that doesn't maybe, of commenting about the immigrant experience that perhaps doesn't address this set of forcing functions, if you like, towards what your experience is going to be. That's a terrible question. I'm sorry.
You're the first questioner to use words like variables, etc., which I did not entirely translate. And now you're saying, you're using a similar phrase. Zara Hindi mein ya Angrezi mein bolo, zara, so that I can get it.
Chalo, so, point I'm making here is that if you
assimilate yourself in a place, in a foreign context.
Acha. Very good. I understand that. Since we are meeting in a literary forum, I would say one assimilates in a foreign context by finding words that explain it to you. One friend who's a reporter who does film journalism in Mumbai said to me that there were people of a certain generation who learned what to do on your first night of the wedding night from watching Kabhi Kabhi, when Amitabh Bachchan removes the ghungat from Rakhi's face.
Shashi Kapoor.
Sashika. That was the tragedy. Sorry. My repressed desire spoke through. Hi, kaise nahi hua? What I'm saying really is that the reason why someone might love Jhumpa Lahiri's fiction and why someone might not like it as much is because it either conforms to, provides a language of identification, of experiences that explain your own hurts or your joys, or it doesn't. So for me, what really gives a chance to quote-unquote assimilate is finding in the popular public realm a language that approximates and explains what you are going through. Or at least that's how I approach it as a writer. I had an uncle who was very poor. He married my mother's sister, but he was brilliant. He's a brilliant physicist. And in the 60s, the Americans were interested in competing with the Soviets, in putting man in space. They were interested in admitting more and more people who were engineers and also doctors, etc. He came here. This is 1966. He sent money back. My father explained their poverty to me by saying, we have sabji or meat to eat with our food. In his family, they only had salt and onion to eat with the roti. Okay. He sent money back, got all his sisters married. He never went back to India. Once he had done his work in Cape Canaveral, he was recruited by the Pentagon, he entered the space, blah, blah, blah. He had all kinds of security things. It seemed, we heard about this later. It was only when I came here to do graduate work in the 80s, late 80s, that I asked my father to bring his mother from their village in Bihar to Patna. And I called them from his home on Thanksgiving. For the first time, in 24 years, the mother heard the son's voice. And the son, hearing this voice, because things had built up and he just, maybe from an insecurity of not wanting to test the Americans' belief or trust in him, whatever, he had not gone. And all he could do was like a calf being slaughtered. He just bayed in the phone. He just said, Ma, Ma. And when he had cut down the phone, he said, I have to go. But he never did. He's now, because my aunt has just died, in November he's going to go to let her ashes, to put her ashes, immerse her ashes in the Ganges. So I don't know how you assimilate. And I don't know how you stay imprisoned in your memories. All I can do is record individual lives. And I don't have large generalizations, sociological statements to make about these people. All I can do, and I think writers should do, is be attentive to individual lives and track, to use a word that has been maligned here, the arc of their lives. That's the task, I think, of the writer and the task of the person who keeps a journal every day. What happened today? What happened today? what happened today.
We have another question. Do we have time for questions?
We don't have any, we've done it twice. You can ask.
Boss, we will talk right now, don't worry. Over samosa and chai. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.